Hello, my name is Jake Ogle, and I will be covering Activity 1 for the King Tide field trip. This presentation was put together by me and my classmates, Chin Shigu and Thomas Ripley. Activity 1 sets the stage for the rest of the day as it helps establish the idea of change over time in the landscape and adaptation to different circumstances. Once students see things have been different before, they can better participate in activities to induce them to imagine how things will be in the future and how their communities will need to adapt. This activity overall aims to introduce students to the history of the land they inhabit via maps and sounds of the Eastern Shore. Students will engage with mapping, visual storytelling, the past, present, future, and soundscapes as tools for imagining change and understanding place. The discussion is best as nonlinear so that students can follow along at the way they imagine, can visualize it in a unique way. The activity is about imagining change and seeing things less permanently, so they should have a flexible path through the activity. I will start with the first section of the student handout, which asks this question. When is it helpful to have a map? This question is intended to establish what students' background knowledge of maps are and demonstrate what they can learn from maps and their perceived value. As we elaborate on maps in this activity and expand on imageability throughout the day, we hope to see that students expand their understanding of the stories that maps can tell. The next set of questions will be asked for each map that is displayed in the activity. What do you notice on this map? Do you see anything familiar? What does the map not show? Next, we ask them to write down something they like from the map. It could be a word, image, or symbol. And then lastly, we ask them to write one question that they have about the map. This was a map sketched on a deerskin by a Native American man in 1721, obtained by Frederick Nicholson, the then governor of South Carolina. It illustrates the space between Charleston and Virginia. The circles represent native lands, while the squares represent European settlements. This is Peter Apian's 1521 map that demonstrates a lack of Black and Indigenous representation in colonial map making. Although not represented in most maps, these voices are still instrumental in cartography and how colonizers understood the land. This is John Smith's 1612 map of Virginia that displays the objectives of conquest and commodification throughout colonization. Next, we have John Speed's map of the Virginia-Maryland border, which was published in an English propaganda book in 1676. Next, we have the 1838 map from Claudius Crozet that spatializes infrastructure improvements, which were detailed as turnpikes, canals, and railroads across the state of Virginia. Overall, it encourages students to think critically about maps as visual storytelling and as historic artifacts, to investigate and question them and the world they are trying to convey, as well as to pick up on devices used in maps that they might use to tell their own story visually. These maps all depict the Eastern Shore, and the first step to imagining future changes is to understand that the present is a snapshot in time, not a reflection of permanence. Students should begin to think about their home as a place that has changed before and will change again. Perhaps these maps may influence their sense of timescale as well, and get them to think beyond this grade level and the next, but in terms of decades and more. The next part looks into history and future imagination. So here students are invited to discuss how life and how understandings of their world may have been different around from when the maps in part 2 were created. What would have been different about life and land 400 years ago? What techniques were used for maps then that are not now? For example, hand-drawn versus ArcGIS. What do you think will be different in 400 years? This activity is intended to connect this generation of students to generations past and understand that each has lived in very different worlds, even if they have all lived on the Eastern Shore. The idea of future change is approached directly and will be revisited throughout the day. This next part is the final part of the student worksheet. To think about your school, imagine that a historian will look at your map in 100 years to understand something about sixth graders at Ndua Middle School. When you draw your map, think about these things. What places of your school do you value? What routes do students and teachers take in the school? What kinds of signs help people move throughout the school? This activity combines personal perspective and visual storytelling with thinking on broad timescales. This activity works on a smaller scale than the rest, and scale is a theme throughout. Storytelling ideas taken from historic maps of the Eastern Shore are meant to be applied to current maps of a place significant to students, and one with which they are deeply familiar. By the end of the day, Telling the story of a reality yet to arrive will be on the minds of students. So beginning the day with the past and then transitioning to the present puts students in the mindset of visualizing change over time and targeting communication to meaning. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I want to give a shout out to Thomas Ripley and Chinshi Gu, who are two of my fellow students, to help me put this presentation together.